week. We're the kind of first real week of May. There's usually a pretty good uptick in volatility and movement in May, so it's very much worth keeping an eye on. We've seen some pretty wild and active Junes and Julys too, but May is typically a pretty good mover, and there's some good things we need to kind of keep an eye on. So here are a few things that I'm watching that I think are pretty interesting as far as the stock market goes. Let's have a little quick peek at my screen here and just kind of see where we're at. Okay, so a couple of news items in the works here. You know, the typical kind of back and forth. The Strait of Hormuz is up and down and all around. It's kind of interesting if we look at this on just a purely kind of technical analysis side of things. I'm not real hardcore on technical analysis, but I think it does always kind of tell us an interesting story. Markets don't move because a chart is laid out. Markets don't move because patterns happen, but patterns do tell us an interesting story. Here's oil futures right here. And this is telling us some interesting stuff here. If we look at kind of the typical, you know, I mean, it's a wild looking chart, but if we look at the typical, is this, you know, a head and shoulders pattern for oil to continue going lower? Because this is laid out the way that it is, doesn't mean oil is headed lower. But what story does this tell us here now? It tells us that there was a big shock over here as the news of the U.S. bombing Iran and the conflict kind of, you know, taking front and center stage. Great, makes sense. Oil prices go up. Perfect sense there. That was followed up by, you know, okay, there's an initial shock. Is this going to turn into something more? And that was the question over here, right? Is this going to actually escalate more? Is this going to get worse? Is this going to turn into a full-blown war, right? And maybe even a much larger global conflict. And then that kind of didn't materialize. And then we see oil prices over here kind of saying, okay, we're going to need much worse news for, you know, these kinds of levels right here, right? We have kind of this $111 level on oil futures, and certainly this kind of 117, 118 level, and the overall high, that spike there that's just shy of 120. We're going to need to see some really, really bad news for oil to spike up above those levels, right? Because what we see happening here is, you know, initial shock, concern of things, you know, getting worse, and then kind of like, even though everything isn't like better, right? Nothing is really improved in this U.S.-Iran conflict situation. The market is saying this is priced in. We've priced this in, and so the news cycle is kind of slowly passing. Yes, there's high expenses with, you know, gas prices have gone up, oil's gone up, fertilizers are becoming an issue, and so on. But the market, regardless, is still kind of pricing that in and saying, okay, we need to see something significantly worse for this to get significantly worse, right? As far as, you know, oil prices going up. And we just haven't seen that yet. Things aren't getting better, but they're not necessarily getting worse. And so we see kind of these lower highs in place here. And so again, because this is positioned the way it is, doesn't mean the market's going to move a certain way. It just means the story is kind of being laid out in the market. And by the time we're over here, there's a little bit of a pricing in. There's a little bit of the news cycle has been digested and absorbed. And now things need to get progressively worse for new highs to come in, or this kind of just continues probably trickling its way lower. And then certainly resolution will probably drive that down, you know, significantly. So just a few things that are worth keeping an eye on and watching and making sure we kind of understand how this actually works and plays out. So that's what I would be watching. But let's talk about the news of the day. First and foremost, we have Palantir announcing earnings after the close today. I'm infamously terrible at guessing and trying to understand what a stock is going to do prior to earnings. These guys could have great earnings, but bad forward guidance. They could have bad earnings, but great forward guidance. I never try to guess any of this stuff, but it is very important to note that it's going to happen and there's going to be a lot of volatility around this. Now, speaking of kind of that picture, right, of we've had this really, really strong uptrend and the market had a different idea, getting up here about where they thought Palantir should be priced, right? Tops out just above or just shy of 210, just above $200 a share, has dipped all the way down to, sub $150 a share. So pretty significant dip there. And now we're kind of in this place of, is this the bottom? Is this low enough for this stock to kind of continue making a little bit of a run? It takes us kind of back. We bottomed out around that 125 level, which was the highs of February 2025 before, liquidation day of April 2025. But then, big run up, big pushes there. That 125 level held pretty well. And we're kind of narrowing and wedging into this descending movement here. I could very much see some of this recent kind of resistance zone around the kind of 50. Oh my goodness gracious! Don't know why my lines aren't working here. Kind of 155, 160 area. That could be a pretty significant breakout for Palantir. So we could see certainly some big moves there. If I saw, if Palantir came out and took out maybe this 125 level and we saw it down, around 110, somewhere in that zone, that would be pretty interesting for me to maybe get some involvement in Palantir. I always have a little bit of involvement on this stock, but if we see a negative earnings and some movements below that 125 level, I'm going to be looking at that a lot closer. And I think that there will be some interesting opportunities there if that happens. So just kind of watch this, but remember it's after the close today. If you don't know how to play earnings, you don't have any kind of strategy around earnings, just watch it and look what kind of opportunities you have to buy into tomorrow. I'll send out some updates on what the earnings report says, how the numbers look, how the earnings call went. But we're definitely just more interested in what the reaction is and how the news is. If there's positive numbers and good forward guidance and the stock goes down a bunch, that will be very curious. If there's decent numbers but good forward guidance, or good numbers and average forward guidance, I think we're going to see a lot of movement happen here. So it's always worth watching. I like these, well talked about high volatility stocks when it comes around earnings time. There's some good plays to be had here. So watch these levels, kind of watch this 160, watch this 125. Anything below 125, starts getting real interesting into buying opportunity. Anything above 155, 160, the momentum's back on, and Palantir's, headed back into highs most likely and beyond. So these are areas I'd be watching and just ready to kind of trade around and see how they shake out. So Palantir looks interesting around there. I'm definitely going to be watching that, and we'll see how it shakes out. Another interesting one. Another interesting one is who's watching this? This was announced, and this has kind of been talked about, but certainly hitting the market recently. eBay. Anybody watching eBay? When was maybe I should be ashamed to even say this, but I haven't looked at an eBay chart in a really, really long time, which is a shame because, if you think about products you use, we all use Amazon like crazy. If you live outside of the US, probably you use eBay a little bit more. I think that's where a lot more of the user base is now. eBay was huge in the US for a long time. They got very dethroned by Amazon. And now here they are kind of back in the crosshairs. It's worth noting eBay's sitting at about a $50 billion market cap. That's pretty significant. I don't think I knew that. I haven't looked at these guys in a pretty long time. But if you look at this long term chart on eBay, I mean, since going public in 1998, right? Since going public in 1998, there's been, I mean, this is a great chart, right? The stock, all time went public here, I think there's been maybe some splits and so on in there, but the stock is up a ton, like 1,000%, in the last chunk. Now, there's a lot of stocks that are up a lot more than eBay for sure, but this has been a pretty steady run. We had some bad runs here, obviously 2008, 2009. This was, the typical software high in 2021. Interest rate just smashed everybody. Market bottoms out October 2022. But then, away these guys go. And by February, October 2023, February 2024, the stock has bottomed out pretty well and makes, this recent run here, it's up 200%. And it's sitting at all-time highs. Even before the news, a good bit before the news, it wasn't much off all-time highs. So eBay's been this stock that just keeps on trucking, massive market cap, wild move. And we've got, we have GameStop trying to buy eBay for, I think, $57 billion. Is that what they were saying? I think it's a $57 billion offer, which is, like $120 a share, $125 a share. So it's a pretty good premium over current stock price, over the stock price when they, initially submitted the offer. It's it's a half cash, half stock deal. Ryan Cohen of GameStop has secured about $20 billion in debt commitment from TD Bank. And so, things are in place. And right now, eBay's reviewing the offer, which is funny because, eBay's cruising along here. They're just making highs, continuing on. Stock's doing great. Company's doing great. eBay's about four or five times the size of GameStop. But it is kind of an interesting marriage because GameStop has like 1,600 locations of physical locations. eBay's obviously all online. There's always this interest in kind of mixing this online space with the physical space. Amazon has been unsuccessful at combining online and physical spots, besides finding a couple of retailers here and there that are willing to accept returns. But Amazon's tried to open some brick and mortar spots and has ultimately closed them. Amazon Go was one of them. Remember the whole you can just walk in and pick up whatever you want, and there's nobody working, and it'll scan you on the way out, kind of a thing. And so we've had that whole thing, but I think it's interesting that GameStop has this big retail location network. It's massive. It's huge. That could be an interesting fit for eBay. So we'll see how it goes. Ryan Cohen's got quite the track record of doing some bold things, and so I wouldn't be too surprised to see some success on that. eBay board is reviewing. There's no word yet, but it should be going the other way. eBay should be bidding on a GameStop, but it's the other way around. So away we go. So this is something we're keeping an eye on. I think it'll be wild. eBay's up on the news about 6%. GameStop is down about 6% on the news. So, this nice little $11 billion market cap company that, I go into GameStop sometimes with my son just to see who's in there and what everybody's doing. And obviously we have, these big movements over here, and we got the meme mania all the way over here in early 2021, and then it tried to light it up again over here. This is a crazy looking stock. Do companies like this recover? this stock doesn't look so different from like a QXO, right? Which, looks like this, right? A company that does a lot of business, makes a lot of money, has a lot of, has a great founder and good track record on being able to execute. These are always interesting stocks that are just, they spike, but they tend to kind of come back to this median price that everyone feels like is fair market value. And at some point, people become wrong, right? On fair market value. It's either lower than this or it's considerably higher than this. And a QXO is certainly one of those stocks. GME, one of those stocks, right? If there is some real value in these physical locations, certainly GameStop, whatever it is they're selling, games and all the stuff that they have in there, that's not moving the needle too much. But maybe these physical locations married with a big online presence is a key to success, and it could also be a key to a lot of debt and a failed merger. Who knows? But it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I don't know how I'll play this, if I will at all, but I'm certainly going to be watching it and looking to see how the opportunity goes here. So I think that is worth looking at and keeping an eye on. Certainly some interesting stuff. We'll see this kind of do what it does. But so far, I think we're in pretty good shape. So, okay, so we've got GameStop, we've got eBay, we've got Palantir. These are all things kind of happening. I'll post a few more details about some earnings this week. We've got a few interesting companies announcing earnings. We'll see how they shake out. We'll see where everything goes. But so far, I think we've got ourselves. I think we've got our hands full. So let's see how that goes, how that plays out, and kind of take it from there. But thanks for watching, everybody. Good luck this week. Should be a busy one. Should be an active one. We'll see how it all shakes out.